When talking about films, or indeed front or forwards, people often use the term Hollywood as a term of derision, as though the taste of cheese in your mouth as you watch something disqualifies something from being good or enjoyable or likeable, when in fact, really, I think there's something to be celebrated about the big, brash Hollywood ending. I don't think cliches ever have to be a problem. There's a reason certain things are done over and over again. There's a reason we have genre, and that's because there's a really pure, simple joy in just seeing someone take the beats you know, hit them perfectly, just as you want to see them, and then get out of town. Then hit the road, go away, you had your film, we did the thing you wanted, we're out of there. It's very tempting, it's very easy to be sniffy about a Reese Witherspoon rom-com, about a low-budget horror movie, about a big, brash action movie in which just... I've got a green screen, I can... But as far as I'm concerned, there's never anything wrong with not being a snob. And that's why if this were a non-rugby film club, I'd be just as quick to recommend Just Like Heaven or Home Again, Reese Witherspoon movies, or Unfriended or Happy Death Day, or, you know, any of those kind of films as quickly as I'd recommend, or probably actually far quicker than I'd recommend the work of Eric Romer or Michael Haneke. There's nothing wrong with leaning into cliche and cheese every now and again. And so, I hold, despite leaning into cliche quite often, Invictus is kinda wonderful. It's Hollywood as hell, and Token Walshman, Jason Lewis-Jones, is clearly the only person on set who had heard of rugby before production began. And yet there's something magical, there's something wonderful about seeing those cliches that we know of sports movies and having them applied to rugby. All of the rugby movies I'm going to be covering in the next few weeks are, should we say, lower in budget. They don't quite have the production value of Invictus. They range from small to shambolic in size. And so there was something really refreshing and great about seeing a proper big budget, recognise the stars, know who all the actors are, know the people involved, take your gran to the cinema, watch it on Channel 5 in a few months' time when they're re-showing it, when you tune in halfway through and you watch it through to the end. It's that kind of movie. It's a proper movie. It's not one you put on Mumbai. It's not a movie you go to an art house cinema to see. It's a proper, I went to showcase movie. Because frankly, as I mentioned in the last video, I think as rugby fans, we're quite used to being jealous of fans of not just boxing, but also baseball, American football, of kickball, all of them. I mean, yes, I'm slightly jealous that goal exists. But you know what Invictus was? Invictus was our moment. It was an Oscar contender about rugby. We got to see, and just let this sink in for a moment, because everyone's got used to it, Matt Damon as Francois Pienaar. The Born Identity, Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon, proper massive Hollywood star, as Francois Pienaar. That really happened. We really got to see Matt Damon. Not only knows who Francois Pienaar is, not only acknowledged him, not only has met him, has got properly inside the score and played him, and been Oscar nominated for playing him. Next I want to see Ryan Gosling as Adrian Strauss and Richie McCaw played by Charlize Theron. I want to see us go all in. Now, Morgan Freeman as Nelson Mandela is obvious casting. It fits in just the way that Baggy's 90 rugby shirts didn't. And yet, there's still something magic and surreal about watching this film and going, that's the guy from the Shawshank Redemption. That's the actual Morgan Freeman. And right now he's talking about seven-cap Springbok fullback Gavin Johnson. And then we have the film's director, because this was pretty much the last movie Clint Eastwood, for it was he, gave us as a reliable, reputable filmmaker before he started mixing up, making incredibly tense, really well-made thrillers with making really tense, really well-made thrillers that are ruined by a scene with a plastic baby in the middle. Through to him making weird, like, like basically amateur student films, through to him making whatever the hell the mule was. I mean, there's a scene in the most recent film, Richard Jewell, which I enjoyed a lot, I thought was actually very good, but there's a scene in which Sam Rockwell flubs his line. He just gets his line wrong and he leaves it in, because that's the kind of director Clint Eastwood is. It kind of sums up where his career's gone better than anything else. He's brilliant, like he's really good at putting a movie together. And yeah, he occasionally has these moments of what you would call like actual incompetence, of just momentarily in amongst doing things that few other directors couldn't. Because though no other filmmakers in Hollywood could make The Mule, and that's a good thing, there are many other directors who could make Invictus, and yet there's a far shorter list of those who would nail it in quite the same way, who would get every beat together in exactly the right order, exactly the right way, that'd be nailing performances like this. And it doesn't really matter a lot of the time that he doesn't know rugby, and it doesn't really matter that we don't get a sense that this is the final, we don't get a sense of, oh, them beating France here is the semi-final. We just follow the journey because we get it on a human, on an emotional level, you could say, I guess. However, when it comes to the rugby, there's clearly one thing that old Clint loves just as much as his character in The Mule loved threesomes. If you haven't seen The Mule, and I really hope you haven't, it's no, actually that's not. If I start talking about The Mule, I'll talk about The Mule for about an hour. So I'll stop talking about The Mule. Because the thing that Clint Eastwood loved most circa 2009-10 was switches. He adores switches because every single rugby scene in the movie, and I'm going to have some of them floating behind me right now, every single rugby scene in the movie, someone seems to be running a switch at all times. It's just constant pops. It's like all the research of rugby he did beforehand was watching one David Campese compilation video on YouTube, like right before rolling the first camera for the first scene, and he just became convinced that fancy inside pops are all there is. And maybe that's what it was in the 95 World Cup. Maybe that's exactly how things were. But my God, there's a lot of switches. So Clint Eastwood's approach to the movie is to recreate individual moments, is for moments that happened in games that are iconic to be created as close as possible during the movie, and in a way that makes it slightly awkward. For instance, Chester Williams' finish here looks entirely natural in real life, him scoring this try, but when recreated on the big screen by an actor trying to dive in the same manner, it looks a touch awkward. So some of the passing, some of the moments in which they tried to just recreate it. The only time they actually use real game footage is for Jonah Lomu's 4 tries against England. Now, Chester Williams, who I've just mentioned, is the only Springbok who really gets much of a part beyond Francois Pienaar, even though he doesn't get many lines, and yet there are quite a few pseudo cameos in which you see actors playing real rugby players that are there for rugby fans to spot. They're like accidental Easter eggs, you know. They're in the script, they're there, but they're not intentional. Clint Eastwood didn't give a damn who Os Duran was. So we get to see Brian Lima make a big hit and start a fight. We get to see a pretty good likeness of Michael Lynagh here. There's Sean Fitzpatrick, similarly, pretty solid despite having a South African accent when you watch the DVD extras. And then we have former BAF number 8, Zach Benatai, as Jonah Lomu himself. We also get this guy as Os Duran. Now, this guy, I looked it up, was in his 40s when filming began, and yet he still looks about 20 years too young to play a 24-year-old Os Duran. We also have cameos from Martha's mum from Doctor Who, quick cameos from like actual former internationals. Tonga Zipi Taione plays a All Black in the film. We get Junior Polungaga, again, former Samoa international, gets a cameo in the film.
And it's Junior Polungaga.
And here, in the very first scene of the film, we get a cameo from England's own Ben Youngs. However, my favourite bit of casting is Clint's son, an all-round, genuinely incredibly handsome man, Scott Eastwood. Now, Scott Eastwood is one of those people who's just so ridiculously handsome to look at that he becomes completely boring. He's like looking at a particularly well done painting. There's nothing wrong with him, and so he just becomes dull. You just kind of go, well, what's the point in that? Like, he's too handsome. What's the point? Go away. And so they cast him as Joel Stransky. Now, the best thing about this isn't the fact that, you know, I'm used to in movies, everyone's about 30% more attractive than they are in real life. That's fine. It doesn't matter that Scott Eastwood is about 180% more attractive than anyone on the earth. It's that he's clearly never heard of rugby. And I'm willing to bet he did do a couple of sessions to learn how to kick and pass and catch and all of this, to be playing the man who drops the goal and kicks the goal, kicks all the points in that World Cup final. And yet you kind of look at it as someone that understands rugby, that knows rugby, and every single kick he puts up, everything he connects with, is being shanked, is going straight in the air, it's missing its target. His drop goal, his eventual winning drop goal, I was going to demonstrate a drop goal, I don't need to do that, you've got it behind me, is awkward, to use that word again, and it's all tiny details, but they kind of add to the enjoyment for me. I would be disconcerted if a Hollywood actor and son of Clint Eastwood, like Scott Eastwood is, knew rugby inside out and was nailing these. It wouldn't feel right. It feels better. It feels more reassuring and more realistic, weirdly, that it isn't realistic, that it isn't an accurate portrayal of the skill being shown. The rugby's also shot at weird angles, and it sometimes feels like Eastwood doesn't understand, this is Clint, what the most dramatic and exciting moments of a game are. He's coming at it from the perspective of another sport. He doesn't quite get where the moments of tension arise in rugby, and that's fine, that's okay. But it does mean that, for example, this moment where Michael Liner dives over for the try that should be putting South Africa's hopes of qualifying, hopes of getting to that final in doubt, instead it just kind of feels like a man falling over. There's also, if we're complaining, there's a scene in which Nelson Mandela makes tea and doesn't stir after putting milk in, which, frankly, I know he was genuinely one of the greatest human beings to ever live, but kind of makes him a monster in my eyes. But, frankly, though there are these issues, it feels like an honour to quibble with them. It's a privilege that I get to complain that Hollywood didn't nail this detail of rugby when making this movie, because we get to see, I'm still getting my head around this, Nelson Mandela, played by Morgan Freeman, talking about Welsh rugby, reacting to the All Blacks' famous record win over Japan. We get to see that. We get to see Matt Damon in a Springboks shirt, and not as a novelty bit, making tackles. We get to see a grand Hollywood recreation of Hughes van der Westhuizen's famous tackle on Jonah Lomu. We get to see, this is a movie, this is a proper Hollywood movie, in which the big third act problem, the obstacle they've got to overcome, the thing they talk about in screenwriting classes as, you know, the big obstacle here that pops up at the 2/3 of the way through the film, that in this movie is Jonah Lomu. Just get your head around that. The big obstacle, the big problem, is Jonah goddamn Lomu. And it's also a film made all the more moving for what happened last year. Because, so the ending was always moving, the ending was always powerful. It's a well put together Hollywood film in which good triumphs, in which a country is united, in which racism is definitely defeated and doesn't exist anymore at the end. It works, and it's always a moving thing. But suddenly, rewatching it this week, I found this scene incredibly moving, because the scene is a number of black kids from the townships go in to receive free clothing donated by charity, and one of the kids is handed a Springbok jersey, and he rejects it because the Springboks are seen as a symbol of oppression, as a symbol of racism, of apartheid. And it occurred to me as I was watching this scene that one of those kids very easily could have been Siya Kolisi. He grew up in exactly that background, and that's how far things have come. Because it's easy to set aside things and talk down things, degrade them as being Hollywood cheese, but these stories happen. Last year South Africa gave us the perfect sequel to Invictus. Last year's Sia Khaleesi's story was even greater as a tale of overcoming the odds. We can criticise things like this and call them cheesy all we want, or we can say they're cliche, they're hackneyed, they're Hollywood. But stories like this, stories like Invictus and like the sequel that's yet to be made, breed more stories like that. And that's why we all love not just rugby, but movies and Hollywood in general. And on that note, I would like all of you to let me know on the note of if they were to make right now Invictus 2, the Sia Khaleesi story, or the story of the 2019 World Cup, who would you cast as who? I'll start things off. Chadwick Boseman, Sia Khaleesi, done. Outside bets, Willem Dafoe as Razzie Erasmus. I'm sure there's far better casting than that in the back of my head, but I can't hit it right now. Reese Witherspoon as Faf de Klerk. Pretty much nailed that one. There's plenty more out there before we move on to the next film. Please let me know, and I'll pick some of the best ones out for next week. But before we move on, before we move past Invictus, I do need to get through our one regular segment here, which is just film number 1 in the Squidge Rugby Film Club, Invictus, directed by Clint Eastwood. Feature the line, a gentleman's hooligan, played by big stroppy man. Yes, it does. Yeah, features it right here.
It's a gentleman's game played by hooligans.
Next week we'll be looking at a far smaller movie, the British film from 2016, 100 Streets, starring Idris Elba and Gemma Arterton, about a fictional former England captain whose life begins to fall apart after he does a bunch of cocaine and cheats on his wife. The film is available free to stream on Amazon Prime. It's also, though, if you don't have Amazon Prime, available either to rent on there and all the other services of that ilk, and the film's only £1.30 free on DVD from Amazon, if you are so inclined. Yes, it's that good.
Who here knows the rules of rugby?
Me? You hit another player when the ref is not looking.